Winter, 1940. Ministry of War. Chiyoda Ward, Tokyo, Japan. The cigarette smoke curled toward the ceiling as Admiral Hiroshi Fujimoto set down his pen with deliberate precision. Outside, snow was beginning to fall on the Imperial Palace grounds. Inside this windowless conference room, 3 generals, 2 admirals, and the Vice Minister of War waited for an answer to the simplest and most dangerous question they could ask. Vice Minister Tojo leaned forward, his voice cutting through the ceremonial courtesies. "If the Empire goes to war with America, can we achieve victory?" Fujimoto's answer would echo through Japanese military archives for generations. "We can run wild for 6 months, perhaps 8 if luck favors us. Beyond that, we face mathematical certainty of destruction." The silence that followed felt like a physical weight. General Sugiyama's teacup stopped halfway to his lips. Admiral Kondo's fingers tightened around his briefing folder. Lieutenant General Muto's face darkened with something between confusion and anger. "Mathematical certainty?" Muto's voice carried an edge sharp enough to cut. "Admiral, you speak as if warfare is an accounting problem." "Modern warfare is an accounting problem," Fujimoto replied, his tone unchanged. "Oil tonnage, steel production, aviation manufacturing capacity, electrical generation, trained workforce demographics. These determine victory far more than courage or tactical brilliance." "You insult the spirit of the imperial forces," Sugiyama began. "I insult nothing." Fujimoto opened his leather portfolio, removing a single sheet covered in columns of numbers. "I simply state what the data reveals. America produces 17 million tons of steel annually. Japan produces 7 million. America extracts 1.2 billion barrels of oil per year. Japan extracts none and must import every drop. America manufactures 50,000 aircraft annually and is expanding. Japan produces 4,500 and is near maximum capacity." He slid the paper across the polished table. "America has 140 million people, 48 million of working age, with universal education and industrial training. Their factories employ more workers than our entire military. Their petroleum reserves could fuel our entire Navy for 40 years. Their electrical grid generates more power in a month than we produce in a year." Tojo studied the numbers in silence. The others shifted uncomfortably. "These statistics," Admiral Kondo began carefully, "assume America can mobilize this capacity for war." "They already are." Fujimoto's voice remained flat, clinical. Roosevelt signed the Two-Ocean Navy Act in July. Congress authorized $37 billion for defense, more than Japan's entire GDP. American shipyards are already expanding. Aircraft factories are moving to 24-hour shifts. They are converting automobile plants to tank production. "Then you propose we surrender without fighting?" Muto's question dripped with contempt. "I propose nothing." Fujimoto met his gaze without flinching. "I was asked our chances. I have given my assessment. If ordered to plan for war, I will do so. But I will not lie about the outcome." 6 months. Tojo spoke softly, still studying the numbers. "Are you certain of this time frame?" Before we continue, click that subscribe button. Like this video and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. It brings me great joy knowing that these war stories and lessons get to people all over the world. Your support helps us bring more thrilling war stories, and trust me, you won't want to miss them. Now let's get back to the story. It is not prophecy, Vice Minister. It is calculation. Japan's oil reserves can sustain full military operations for approximately 180 days. Our aviation fuel stocks, less than that. America's industrial production requires 6 to 9 months to fully convert and accelerate. During that window, we can achieve victories. After that window closes, Fujimoto didn't need to finish. The Admiral spent considerable time in America, Kondo offered, as if this explained or excused Fujimoto's pessimism. Perhaps he was overly impressed by their industrial displays. I was impressed by mathematics, Admiral Kondo. Mathematics does not negotiate or bluff. The meeting continued for another 40 minutes, but nothing changed. Fujimoto had delivered his warning. Whether anyone would heed it remained to be seen. As the officers filed out, Tojo lingered at the doorway. Admiral Fujimoto. A question, if I may. Fujimoto waited. When you stood in those American factories, what did you see that we cannot understand from reports? Fujimoto was quiet for a long moment. Waste, Vice Minister. I saw them waste more in a day than we produce in a month. And I realized a nation that can afford such waste can afford to lose 100 battles and continue fighting. We cannot afford to lose one. Tojo nodded slowly and left. Fujimoto remained alone in the conference room, staring at the paper of statistics that no one had taken with them. Outside, the snow continued to fall on a capital city that would be ash within 5 years. Sapporo, Hokkaido. Winter, 1896. Hiroshi Fujimoto learned about scarcity before he learned to read. His first memory was of cold, the kind that crept through walls and settled into bones, the kind that made breathing hurt. Their house had 2 rooms and 6 people. His father, Kenji, worked as a fisheries inspector, walking the docks in weather that froze his beard solid. His mother, Yuki, took in laundry, her hands perpetually red and cracked from icy water. They ate herring. They ate barley. They ate pickled vegetables stored in clay jars, buried in the frozen ground. Rice appeared on New Year's Day, 1 small bowl per person. Savored like gold. Young Hiroshi learned to calculate before he knew why. He counted how many pieces of dried fish remained. He measured how much charcoal burned each night in their single brazier. He understood that his father's monthly salary, 12 yen, had to cover rent, food, fuel, and clothing for 6 people. There was never enough. At 7 years old, Hiroshi discovered his gift for numbers. His teacher, noting the boy's ability to solve arithmetic problems faster than students 3 years older, gave him a worn textbook on elementary algebra. Hiroshi devoured it in 2 weeks. Numbers made sense. Numbers could be predicted, controlled, optimized. Numbers didn't lie. His older brother Takeshi died that winter. Pneumonia. The doctor cost 2 yen, money they didn't have until it was too late. Hiroshi sat beside his brother's funeral altar, watching the incense burn, calculating how many days of food that 2 yen would have bought. 23 days. His brother's life was worth 23 days of rice. The mathematics of scarcity became his obsession. He tracked his family's finances in a small notebook, creating budgets, finding efficiencies, suggesting where to save a few sen here and there. His mother found it endearing. His father found it useful. By 10, Hiroshi managed the household accounts better than most adults. By 12, he understood that poverty wasn't bad luck or moral failing. It was mathematics. Limited resources divided by too many needs. The equation never balanced. When he learned about the Naval Academy's full scholarship program, free tuition, free housing, free meals, the decision was obvious. The Navy meant education. Education meant escape. Escape meant he would never again calculate whether his family could afford a doctor. In 1907, at 18, Hiroshi Fujimoto left Hokkaido for Etajima Naval Academy. He carried a single bag, wore his father's repaired coat, and had 3 yen in his pocket. He looked back once at the small house where he'd grown up, its roof heavy with snow, smoke trickling from the chimney. He never forgot what scarcity felt like. Years later, standing in an American warehouse in Detroit that wasted more food daily than his childhood village consumed in a month, that memory would return with crushing force. The realization that America didn't just have abundance, they had abundance they didn't even notice, would reshape everything he understood about war, victory, and Japan's future. But first, he had to see it for himself. April 1919. Fujimoto arrived at Harvard carrying a single leather suitcase and wearing his naval uniform, a figure of quiet intensity among the Gothic towers of Cambridge. He enrolled as a graduate research student, ostensibly to study petroleum economics. His transcript would later show respectable marks in industrial chemistry and economic theory, but these grades obscured the real education taking place. Living in a boarding house near Central Square, Fujimoto established a routine that would have seemed pathological to observers. He slept 3 to 4 hours nightly, less when the research demanded it. The rest of his time was spent in Harvard's libraries, reading everything available on American oil production, steel manufacturing, electrical generation, aviation technology, and industrial workforce productivity. His room became a command center of American industrial intelligence. Maps of oil fields covered one wall. Statistical abstracts of factory outputs lined his desk. Technical journals about assembly line innovations were stacked in chronological order. Charts tracking American automobile production growth rates were pinned above his narrow bed. The numbers he discovered were staggering. America produced 67% of the world's oil in 1919, nearly 380 million barrels that year alone. Japan produced zero. Every drop had to be imported, mostly from America itself or the Dutch East Indies. American steel production exceeded 42 million tons annually, more than Britain, Germany, France, and Japan combined. American electrical generation capacity was expanding at 18% per year. The number of machine tools in American factories outnumbered Japan's total industrial workforce. These weren't just statistics to Fujimoto. They were the coordinates of Japan's future defeat. Yet the real education came during Harvard's summer breaks, when the academic veneer fell away and Fujimoto disappeared into the industrial heart of America. Summer 1919, East Texas. Fujimoto stood beneath a derrick outside Beaumont, watching crude oil gush into collection tanks at a rate that defied comprehension. The roughneck beside him, a man named Bill, who'd mistaken the Japanese officer for a visiting geologist, laughed at his expression. "This here's a slow well, friend. Pumps about 800 barrels a day." 800 barrels, daily. Japan's entire navy consumed 2,000 barrels daily during peacetime operations. Fujimoto spent 6 weeks in the Texas oil fields, hitchhiking between Beaumont, Houston, and the newly discovered fields near Kilgore. He survived on bread and apples, sleeping in boarding houses that cost 25 cents per night, all to maximize his observation time. The scale was incomprehensible. Single wells produced more in a week than Japan imported in a month. The Texaco refinery at Port Arthur processed 100,000 barrels daily, an entire facility running on electricity, automatic pumps working 24 hours without pause. Natural gas, considered waste product, burned off in flares that lit the night sky for miles. They were burning enough fuel to power Tokyo as waste. "Oil is the blood of modern warfare," Fujimoto wrote in his journal that night. "Ships, planes, tanks, trucks, all drink oil. America has oceans of it beneath their soil. Japan has none. This single fact determines everything." Summer 1920. Detroit. Fujimoto stood outside Ford's River Rouge plant watching the shift change. 68,000 workers streamed out, most heading to private automobiles, a sight impossible in Japan, where even senior military officers rarely owned cars. He had hitchhiked 900 miles from Cambridge to observe what Henry Ford called the liberation of the common man through mass production. Inside the plant, which Fujimoto toured by claiming to be an engineering researcher, he witnessed the assembly line that had revolutionized manufacturing. A vehicle rolled off the line every 43 seconds. Workers performed single repetitive tasks with machine precision. The entire process from raw steel to finished automobile took 93 minutes. Fujimoto filled 2 notebooks during his week in Detroit. He calculated that Ford alone employed more industrial workers than Japan's entire navy. The company's daily steel consumption exceeded Japan's weekly production. The Americans have made manufacturing into warfare, and he wrote, they produce machines the way we produce rice, systematically, efficiently, in quantities that defy imagination. Each worker is a specialist. Each process is measured. Each improvement is incorporated immediately. But Fujimoto recognized something beyond mere numbers. Those assembly lines producing automobiles could just as easily produce military trucks, tanks, aircraft engines. Workers skilled in precision manufacturing could build weapons. The vast supply chains delivering parts to Detroit could deliver ammunition to battlefields. Summer 1921. Wright Field, Dayton, Ohio. At the Army Air Service testing facility, Fujimoto watched American engineers test a new aircraft engine design. They ran it to failure deliberately, recording every data point as pistons seized and metal screamed. Then they built another one and tested it again. We go through 40 prototypes before production, the chief engineer explained. Failure teaches us more than success. 40 prototypes. Japan's entire aviation industry produced fewer than 40 engines monthly. The engineer continued, once we perfect the design, we can produce 500 engines per month, maybe 1,000 if we add shifts. Fujimoto watched them destroy a third engine that afternoon. Each failure analyzed with clinical precision, each lesson incorporated into the next iteration. That night, in his Cambridge apartment, Fujimoto completed his calculation. He spread his notebooks across the desk. 3 years of data, observations, measurements, and analysis. Oil production rates, steel tonnage, manufacturing capacity, workforce demographics, aviation technology development cycles. He worked until dawn, checking and rechecking the mathematics. The conclusion was inescapable. Japan could achieve tactical victories for 6 months, perhaps 8 with perfect execution and favorable luck. Japanese skill, training, and strategic positioning could exploit the window before American industry fully mobilized. But beyond that window, American production would become an unstoppable tide. For every ship Japan built, America would build 10. For every aircraft Japan produced, America would produce 20. For every barrel of fuel Japan rationed, America would burn 100. The mathematics allowed no other outcome. Fujimoto stared at the numbers as morning light crept through his window. Japan had already lost any war with America. The outcome had been determined in blast furnaces and oil derricks long before the first shot would be fired. The only variable was time, and he had just calculated it. 6 months. March 1922. Fujimoto returned to Japan with 3 steamer trunks full of notebooks, technical journals, and statistical abstracts. He also returned with a reputation that preceded him. Whispers had already reached Tokyo about the officer who spent his summers hitchhiking through American oil fields instead of attending diplomatic functions. His first assignment: brief the Naval General Staff on American industrial capacity. The briefing lasted 40 minutes. Fujimoto presented his findings with clinical precision: oil production rates, steel tonnage figures, manufacturing capacity projections, workforce analysis. He concluded with his calculated assessment: any war with America would result in Japanese victory for approximately 6 months, followed by inevitable industrial collapse. Admiral Kato Kanji, chief of the Naval General Staff, listened in silence. When Fujimoto finished, Kato set down his pen. "You have become too American, Fujimoto-san." The words hung in the air like an accusation. "I have become realistic, Admiral. You have lost faith in the Japanese spirit." Kato's voice hardened. "You see only numbers and machines. You forget that wars are won by warriors, not factories." "Modern wars are won by factories producing warriors faster than the enemy can kill them," Fujimoto replied. "America can afford to lose 100 pilots and train 200 more. We cannot." The room shifted uncomfortably. Speaking such defeatism bordered on insubordination. Captain Ishikawa, a rising star among the Navy's militant faction, stood abruptly. "This is exactly the poisonous thinking that comes from spending too long among our enemies. Perhaps the Admiral has forgotten which flag he serves. I serve Japan by telling the truth. You serve Japan by preparing for victory, not predicting defeat." The argument escalated until Kato raised his hand for silence. "Admiral Fujimoto, your observations are noted. However, this staff operates on the principle that Japanese superiority in training, tactics, and spirit will overcome any material disadvantage. That is all." Fujimoto bowed and left. His report was filed and forgotten. Over the following months, Fujimoto's warnings became increasingly unwelcome. At a strategy conference in July 1922, he presented calculations showing Japan's oil reserves could sustain full military operations for only 6 months. He was accused of defeatist mathematics. When he argued that Japan should avoid war entirely and focus on diplomatic solutions, an anonymous letter appeared at his quarters calling him a white-hearted traitor, a man whose soul had been bleached by America. In October, someone left a tanto knife outside his door with a note. "True samurai do not calculate defeat. They choose death." The threat was clear. The ultra-nationalist factions, groups like the Cherry Blossom Society and the Blood Brotherhood League, viewed Fujimoto's realism as treason. Officers who spoke against the spirit of Bushido had a tendency to suffer accidents. Admiral Yamamoto Isuke, one of Fujimoto's few remaining allies in the naval ministry, arranged a solution. "They cannot touch you if you are essential," Yamamoto explained quietly over tea. "I am assigning you to Strategic Planning Division. You will work on logistics, supply chain analysis, and operational capacity assessments. Technical work, non-political. And my warnings will be documented, filed, preserved for history." Yamamoto's expression was grim. "But not heard, Fujimoto-san. No one wants to hear them." Strategic Planning Division became Fujimoto's cage. He spent the next decade producing meticulous reports on fuel consumption rates, supply line vulnerabilities, and production bottlenecks. Every report concluded the same way. Japan lacks the industrial capacity to sustain prolonged warfare against America. Every report was acknowledged, filed, and ignored. By 1937, when Japan invaded China, Fujimoto's calculations showed the operation would drain oil reserves dangerously low. His warnings were dismissed as excessive caution. By 1940, when Admiral Yamamoto began planning the attack on Pearl Harbor, Fujimoto submitted a 47-page analysis demonstrating that even a successful surprise attack would only delay the inevitable. The report was read by 3 officers and marked pessimistic, disregard. When Vice Minister Tojo asked Fujimoto directly, "Can we achieve victory?" it wasn't because anyone wanted to hear the answer. It was because protocol required the question be asked. But the war plans were already drawn. The orders were already drafted. The decision had already been made. Fujimoto had calculated Japan's defeat with mathematical precision. Now he would watch it unfold exactly as predicted, powerless to stop the machinery already in motion. The only question that remained was whether anyone would remember he had warned them before the fires began. December 7, 1941. Fujimoto sat alone in his office at Naval General Staff Headquarters when the coded telegram arrived. Tora, Tora, Tora. Pearl Harbor. Success! Down the hallway, officers erupted in celebration. Sake bottles appeared. Men embraced. Someone began singing the Imperial Anthem. The surprise attack had exceeded all expectations. 8 battleships damaged or destroyed. Nearly 200 aircraft eliminated. American Pacific power is crippled in a single morning. Fujimoto opened his desk drawer and retrieved a leather-bound journal. On the first page, dated March 1922, he had written a single sentence. "If war comes, Japan will run wild for 6 months. Then the collapse begins." He turned to a blank page and wrote the date. December 7, 1941. Beneath it, Day 1. The clock starts now. The victories came exactly as Fujimoto had predicted. December. Wake Island falls. Guam captured. Hong Kong surrounded. January 1942. Manila occupied. Kuala Lumpur taken. The rising sun advances across Southeast Asia like a tide. February. Singapore surrenders. The Gibraltar of the East conquered in a week. The Dutch East Indies fall, securing oil fields Japan desperately needed. March. Rangoon captured. Burma isolated. Java defeated. The Greater East Asia co-prosperity sphere expands with each passing week. In Tokyo, the celebrations never stopped. Newspapers proclaimed Japanese invincibility. Schoolchildren sang songs about divine warriors. The military command operated in a state of euphoric vindication. Proof that spirit and training could overcome American industrial advantage. Fujimoto attended the victory briefings in silence. While officers pointed to maps showing new conquests, he studied different maps. Maps of American industrial capacity that he updated daily from intelligence reports and American newspaper articles that still reached neutral embassies. The data terrified him. January 1942. American aircraft production increases to 2,100 planes monthly. February. Roosevelt authorizes 60,000 aircraft production target for 1942. Congress approves without debate. March. American shipyards launch 47 new vessels. Liberty ship production time drops from 230 days to 70 days. At a strategy meeting in April, Admiral Kondo raised his sake cup in triumph. "The Americans are demoralized. Our pilots report minimal resistance. Their remaining carriers flee from engagement." Fujimoto set down his tea. "Admiral, have you reviewed the latest American production figures?" "Production?" Kondo laughed. "Fujimoto-san, we are winning battles, not competing in manufacturing contests. We are competing in exactly that." Fujimoto opened his folder. America produced 19,000 aircraft in 1941. They will produce 47,000 in 1942. By 1943, current projections suggest 85,000 aircraft. We produce 5,000 annually at maximum capacity. The room quieted. Additionally, American shipyards are launching one Essex-class aircraft carrier every 3 months. Each carries 90 aircraft. We lost 29 aircraft at Pearl Harbor. They are building capacity to replace our entire Air Force every 4 months. "These are projections, not facts," Captain Ishikawa interjected. "American promises. These are not promises. These are production reports from completed facilities." Fujimoto slid a document across the table. Boeing alone employs 30,000 workers in Seattle. Douglas Aircraft has 44,000 in California. Consolidated Aircraft, 25,000. Grumman, 6,000. And those numbers are growing. He paused, meeting their eyes. "Gentlemen, we have sunk 4 American carriers. They are building 8. We have destroyed 200 aircraft. They are producing 4,000 monthly. We control the oil fields of the East Indies. They control the oil fields of Texas, Oklahoma, and California, which produce 60 times more. You speak as if we have already lost, Kondo said coldly. No, Admiral. I speak as if the 6-month window is closing. Fujimoto checked his watch. We are currently on day 127. We have approximately 53 days remaining before American industrial output reaches full mobilization capacity. And then? Fujimoto closed his folder. And then we will discover whether wars are won by warriors or by factories. I already know the answer. We will learn it together. May 1942. Fujimoto's journal entries became shorter, more clinical. Day 147. American production exceeds projections. Carrier Yorktown, damaged at Coral Sea, repaired in 48 hours. Japanese repair capacity, 4 to 6 weeks minimum. Day 158. Intelligence reports 15 new escort carriers under construction. Japan has 0 carrier replacement capacity. Day 167. American oil production reaches 1.4 billion barrels annually. Our captured Dutch East Indies fields produce 65 million. Day 179. The industrial avalanche has begun. We are still celebrating victories. Day 180. 6 months exactly. The window closes. Tomorrow, we enter the phase I have calculated for 20 years. Tomorrow, we learn what happens when mathematics meets mythology. On June 4th, 1942, day 181, Admiral Nagumo's carrier fleet steamed toward a small island in the Pacific. Its name was Midway, and Fujimoto knew with absolute certainty that everything was about to change. June 4th, 1942, day 100. Fujimoto sat in the operations room at Naval General Staff Headquarters, listening to radio reports from Midway with the detachment of a doctor watching a terminal patient's final decline. The initial reports were optimistic. Nagumo's 4 fleet carriers, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, Hiryu, had launched their first strike wave against Midway Island. American resistance was expected. Victory was certain. Then the transmissions changed. 0920 hours. Enemy dive bombers attacking, taking evasive action. 0925 hours. Akagi hit. Fires spreading. 0930 hours. Kaga burning. Flight deck destroyed. 0935 hours. Soryu. Static. The operations room fell silent. Officers stared at the communications board where minutes earlier they had tracked 4 carriers. Now red markers appeared, damage reports, fire alerts, abandonment orders. In less than 6 minutes, 3 fleet carriers, the backbone of Japanese naval aviation, were burning wrecks. Admiral Kondo's face had gone white. How? Our intelligence reported only 1 American carrier in the area. There are 3. Fujimoto said quietly. Enterprise, Hornet, and Yorktown. The carrier we damaged at Coral Sea. The one they repaired in 48 hours. That's impossible. Yorktown required months of... American shipyards don't operate on Japanese schedules, Admiral. By evening, the casualty reports were complete. 4 fleet carriers lost. Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, Hiryu. All sunk. 248 aircraft destroyed, 357 sailors dead, including many of Japan's most experienced carrier pilots, men who had trained for a decade, irreplaceable veterans of Pearl Harbor, Wake Island, and Darwin. The Americans lost 1 carrier, Yorktown. They had 7 more under construction. Fujimoto returned to his office and opened his journal to the entry from 6 months prior. If war comes, Japan will run wild for 6 months. Then the collapse begins. He wrote beneath it. Day 181, Midway. 4 carriers lost. The mathematics have arrived on schedule. The collapse begins. June 5, 1942. The Naval Ministry convened an emergency session. The mood was funereal. Gentlemen, Admiral Nagano began, his voice hollow. "We must assess our carrier replacement capacity and—" "We have none," Fujimoto interrupted. Every head turned. "Admiral Fujimoto, we have no carrier replacement capacity. The 4 carriers we lost yesterday represented 5 years of construction and 10 years of pilot training. American shipyards will replace their single lost carrier in 3 months. They will replace all 4 of ours in 9 months. We cannot replace them at all." Captain Ishikawa stood abruptly. "You speak as if the war is over." "The war was over 6 months ago, Captain. Yesterday, we simply received confirmation." "This is defeatist. This is mathematics." Fujimoto's voice cut through the room like a blade. "I calculated this 20 years ago. I warned you in 1922. I warned you in 1940. I told you, exactly, that we would run wild for 6 months. That time frame expired yesterday. Now we enter the phase where American industrial production becomes the dominant factor." He stood, retrieving a folder from his briefcase. "American aircraft production for June 1942, 4,200 planes. Japanese production, 425. American pilot training output, 2,000 monthly. Japanese, 180 monthly. American oil production, 115 million barrels monthly. Japanese, 5 million including captured Dutch East Indies fields." He dropped the folder on the table. "For every pilot we lost at Midway, America will train 11. For every aircraft we destroyed, they will build 40. For every ship we sink, they will launch 10. This is not pessimism. This is production capacity." The room remained silent. Admiral Nagano finally spoke. "What do you recommend? Admiral Fujimoto?" Fujimoto looked at the maps on the wall. Red markers showing Japanese conquests from Tokyo to Burma, from the Aleutians to New Guinea. Territory purchased with blood and steel, now impossible to hold. "I recommend you read the report I submitted in March 1922, he said quietly. "But it is 20 years too late for recommendations." July 1942. American production statistics arrived weekly through intelligence channels. Each report confirmed Fujimoto's calculations with terrifying precision. Essex-class carriers, 3 launched, 5 more under construction. Liberty ships, 140 completed in 6 months. Aircraft production, rising toward 5,000 monthly. Pilot training, expanding to 30,000 annually. In Tokyo, the propaganda ministry concealed Midway's losses. Newspapers declared strategic victory. Radio broadcasts celebrated continued resistance. But in the Naval General Staff offices, officers began requesting transfers to Fujimoto's Strategic Planning Division. They wanted to see his calculations. They wanted to know how much time remained. Fujimoto showed them his journal. 20 years of data, predictions, and warnings that had been dismissed as defeatist pessimism. Every prediction had come true. The 6-month window had closed exactly on schedule. And now the industrial tide was rising, unstoppable and inevitable, ready to drown everything in its path. August 1943 to 609. Fujimoto stood before a wall-size map in his office, tracking American production with the methodical precision of a coroner documenting cause of death. Red pins marked Japanese naval losses. Blue pins marked American ship launches. The blue pins were consuming the map. His latest intelligence summary lay open on his desk. Willow Run Plant, Michigan. B-24 Liberator bomber completed every 63 minutes. Boeing Seattle, B-17 Flying Fortress every 90 minutes. Douglas Long Beach, 1 transport aircraft every 45 minutes. Every hour, the Americans were adding bombers to their fleet faster than Japan could train pilots to oppose them. Chrysler Tank Arsenal, Detroit. Sherman tanks, 5 per hour, 120 per day. Fisher Body Plant, Tank production converted from automobile assembly lines in 6 weeks. American factories were producing more tanks daily than Japan's entire armored corps possessed. But the ships were what haunted Fujimoto's nights. Kaiser Shipyards, Richmond, California. Liberty ship construction time reduced to 42 days. The yard employed 90,000 workers across 4 shifts. They were launching cargo vessels faster than Japan's entire submarine fleet could sink them. One ship, the Robert E. Peary, had been constructed in 4 days, 15 hours. 4 days. Japan's shipyards required 18 months to build a destroyer. Fujimoto updated his charts with mechanical precision. American aircraft production, 1943. Projected 85,000 units. Japanese production, 16,600 units. American carrier launches. 8 Essex-class fleet carriers operational. 9 more under construction. Japanese carriers, 2 under construction. Completion date uncertain due to steel shortages. American pilot training output, 100,000 annually. Japanese pilot training, reduced to 5,000 annually due to fuel rationing. The mathematics were no longer predictions, they were obituaries. October 1943. A young lieutenant named Saito arrived at Fujimoto's office carrying fuel consumption reports from the combined fleet. His hands trembled as he set the folder on the desk. "Admiral, I need you to check my calculations. There must be an error." Fujimoto opened the folder. He read in silence. Then he looked up at the lieutenant's pale face. "There is no error, Saito-san. But if these numbers are correct, the combined fleet has fuel for 3 months of limited operations, 6 weeks of full combat operations." The lieutenant sat down heavily. "How do we fight a war with 6 weeks of fuel?" "We don't." Fujimoto returned the folder. "We retreat, conserve, and wait for negotiations that will never come. The Americans don't need to negotiate. They simply need to continue producing." He gestured to his wall of statistics. America currently extracts 1.6 billion barrels of oil annually. Our captured East Indies fields produce 25 million barrels when the refineries aren't being bombed. American tankers deliver 400 million barrels to the Pacific Theater. We cannot interdict that supply. Their submarines are destroying our tanker fleet faster than we can protect it. Then what do we do? Fujimoto had no answer. December 1943, day 759. Fujimoto's journal entries became epitaphs. Rabaul airfield bombed daily. Lost 128 aircraft this month. Replacement, 31 aircraft. Fuel allocation, 40% of requirement. Pilot training suspended. No aviation fuel available. Truck lagoon under constant surveillance. American submarines sink 3 tankers weekly. Oil reserves, critical. Steel production, 45% of 1941 levels. Aluminum, 38%. Copper. Catastrophic shortages. We are cannibalizing damaged aircraft to repair operational ones. The Americans waste more fuel in training exercises than we allocate to combat operations. February 1944. Admiral Koga, commander of the combined fleet, requested Fujimoto's presence at a strategy conference. "Admiral Fujimoto, we need an honest assessment. Can we hold the Marianas?" Fujimoto looked at the men around the table. Exhausted officers planning defenses with non-existent resources. "No." "Can we hold the Philippines?" "No." "Can we hold Formosa?" "No." Koga's voice dropped. "What can we hold?" Fujimoto stood and walked to the map of the Pacific. He traced a line from the Marianas to the Philippines to Formosa to Okinawa, each island another stepping stone toward Japan's home islands. "Nothing, Admiral. We can hold nothing. The Americans are not fighting a war. They are conducting an industrial demonstration. They produce more in a day than we produce in a month. They replace losses faster than we can inflict them. They fuel operations we can only theorize about. He turned from the map. I calculated this in 1922. I warned you in 1940. I told you we had 6 months. We are now 27 months beyond that window. What we are experiencing now is not defeat. It is mathematics arriving at its inevitable conclusion. Then what do you suggest we do? Fujimoto looked at Koga. A good man, a capable officer, trapped in an impossible situation. Survive, Admiral. Survive, and hope they show mercy when the mathematics are complete. Outside, the winter wind carried ash from Tokyo's industrial districts, where American bombers had begun their work. Fujimoto stood alone, watching the smoke rise. A man who had foreseen the future 20 years earlier and was now condemned to live inside it. The industrial tide had arrived, and it was drowning everything. August 15, 1945, day 1347. Fujimoto listened to the Emperor's radio broadcast from his office at Naval General Staff Headquarters. The recording crackled through poor speakers, the voice thin and distant, speaking in formal court language most Japanese had never heard. The war situation has developed not necessarily to Japan's advantage, developed not necessarily to advantage. The euphemism would have been darkly comedic if it weren't describing the incineration of 2 cities and the deaths of millions. When the broadcast ended, Fujimoto opened his journal to the first page. March 1922, 23 years earlier. If war comes, Japan will run wild for 6 months. Then the collapse begins. He had been off by 11 days. The building around him was silent. No celebration, no despair. Just the hollow quiet of men who had known this moment was coming, and were now facing the weight of having arrived. Fujimoto picked up his pen and began to write his final report. On the nature of modern warfare, a strategic assessment. Admiral Hiroshi Fujimoto, August 1945. The report was 17 pages. Clinical, data-driven, merciless. In modern war, the victor is decided in the factory, not the battlefield. Superior tactics, training, and warrior spirit provide temporary advantage, measured in months. Industrial capacity provides permanent advantage, measured in tonnage, fuel, and replacement rates. Japan possessed superior tactics, training, and initial strategic position. We exploited this advantage for precisely 6 months. Thereafter, American industrial mathematics became the dominant variable. No amount of courage or sacrifice could alter production capacity. Ratios of 10.1 in aircraft, 20.1 in ships, 60.1 in oil. This outcome was calculable in 1922. It was calculated. The warnings were provided. They were ignored. Modern warfare is mathematics. We attempted to fight an equation with mythology. The result was inevitable. He signed the report and placed it in a sealed envelope addressed to the War History Office. Then he walked home through the ruins of Tokyo. September 1945. The American occupation forces arrived with clipboards and questionnaires. They wanted to understand how Japan had made its decisions. Who had warned against war? Who had predicted this outcome? Fujimoto's name appeared repeatedly in captured documents. Warnings dismissed, reports filed and forgotten. Calculations marked defeatist pessimism. An American naval intelligence officer named Commander Hayes requested an interview. Admiral Fujimoto, our analysts have reviewed your pre-war assessments. Your 6-month prediction was remarkably accurate. It was not a prediction. It was mathematics. Yes, but, Hayes consulted his notes. You submitted reports in 1922, 1935, 1938, and 1940, all warning against war with America. All ignored. Correct. Why did your leadership ignore such accurate analysis? Fujimoto was quiet for a long moment. Because I told them something they could not accept, that courage was insufficient, that spirit could not overcome steel, that Japan had already lost before beginning. He looked at Hayes directly. Your country won this war in Detroit and Texas, Commander, not at Midway or Iwo Jima. Those were merely confirmations of decisions made in blast furnaces and oil refineries. I understood this. My colleagues did not want to understand this. Hayes closed his notebook. What will you do now, Admiral? I will teach, if permitted. Perhaps the next generation will learn that mathematics does not negotiate. October 1950. Fujimoto died quietly in his sleep at age 61. Heart failure, the doctors said. Exhaustion. His family knew. His funeral was small. A few former students, some junior officers who had read his reports after the war and understood what Japan had lost by ignoring him. The American occupation authorities had declassified his pre-war warnings by then. Japanese historians were beginning to study them, trying to understand how one man had seen so clearly what an entire military establishment had refused to acknowledge. His final report, on the nature of modern warfare, became required reading at the National Defense Academy. His calculations were studied in military colleges worldwide as a case study in the danger of ignoring data-driven analysis. His warnings became Japan's national shame, proof that they had known, had been told explicitly, and had chosen mythology over mathematics anyway. Legacy. Admiral Hiroshi Fujimoto spent years in America and warned Japan would lose in 6 months. He was right about the time frame. He was right about the outcome. He was right about the reasons. He was ignored. And 3 million Japanese died learning what he had calculated in a Harvard library in 1922. In modern war, the victor is decided in the factory, not the battlefield. Mathematics does not negotiate, and courage, no matter how genuine, cannot overcome industrial capacity ratios of 20.1. Fujimoto had seen the future with perfect clarity. His tragedy was not that he was wrong. His tragedy was that he was right, and no one wanted to hear it until the fires had already begun. The Americans have made manufacturing into warfare. They produce machines the way we produce rice, systematically, efficiently, in quantities that defy imagination. We cannot compete with this. We can only calculate when we will be buried by it. Admiral Hiroshi Fujimoto. Journal entry. Detroit. Summer 1920.